And that brings us to our next guest now, though. In the corporate world, lots of differences between America and New Zealand. Our life coach, Harold Hillman, is going to help us through it. Hey, Harold, how are you?
Trudi, I'm fine, thank you.
Let's have a look at some distinctions first. The tall poppy syndrome, it is absolutely prevalent here in New Zealand, but I understand from talking with you before that it's not so much that in America.
Yeah, look, when I moved here in 2003, it was one of the questions that a lot of my Kiwi friends would ask me, have you noticed tall poppy syndrome? And I had noticed it. It is pretty prevalent. The upside is that it's underpinned by humility, which is a wonderful attribute. But when you overplay humility, it really can. It's difficult to celebrate success, to recognize high achievers, and it's just harder for people to stand out for individual achievement, which is an important part of wanting to go to work to make a difference. And so I do believe that in New Zealand, we can sort of push the edge a bit more on that whole notion that winning is actually okay.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's very different. What are the noticeable differences in business practice in the workplace between the States and New Zealand from your mind?
Well, I think following on from sort of that more focus on humility, career management in New Zealand, we are more subtle here, less explicit in New Zealand compared to the U.S. So in the U.S., for example, in terms of managing your career, it's pretty common to signal your intent when you want to move up, even to actively seek out a mentor or what we would call champions in the company. Here in New Zealand, we are a bit more subtle about that, a little bit more reticent in terms of seeking out mentors. I often find people that I coach less willing to do that because of concern that it might be bothering the individual when, in fact, it's in the U.S. Considered to be signaling. There's also that notion around performance management. And New Zealand is a very relational culture. I love New Zealand for that reason. But relationships here, certainly in business, can make you or break you. So Kiwis are far less inclined to burn bridges quickly. In the States, very often that happens. But we are a bit more careful in conversations here. Particularly because you just don't know who's going to be your boss in 10 years.
That's right, exactly. What we call Auckland is Smallkland, and that's 2 degrees of separation in New Zealand rather than the 7 elsewhere. And I guess us Kiwis tend to worry about what others think a bit more, I reckon.
Yeah, a bit more around that. Again, it is with the 2 degrees of separation, people are just a lot closer here. So it just makes it difficult sometimes to push into things with a bit more edge. What I will say, what I really love about New Zealand's taught me a lot about teams. Teams are stronger in New Zealand in organizations. That's the upside of humility and downplaying big egos and the need for status. That's far less important here in New Zealand, whereas in the States, that individualism tends to be promoted a bit more. I also appreciate, Trudi, that work-life balance is much healthier in New Zealand.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, I don't run across, you've heard of the type A personality. That was a term described when I worked at Prudential in New York and a lot of my friends on Wall Street. Type A personalities, they, anywhere between 15 to 18 hours a day in the office, high drive, high burnout sort of culture. What I love about New Zealand is that there is more balance. There is more emphasis. People do spend more time with family and loved ones on the weekends and in the evening. Given that work, has become pervasive into the home, there is much more sense of balance and perspective in New Zealand. And
you reckon you've noticed also an entrepreneurial spirit that's stronger here?
I sure have. I ran across an interesting statistic a year ago. Over 90% of New Zealand businesses are small businesses with 10 or fewer employees. That's an amazing a statistic, and really I think reflects an entrepreneurial spirit where people are inclined to back themselves, to just launch into something that's important to them, that the aspiration is not to necessarily grow wealthy as much as it is to back yourself, plug into something that you really believe in. And, and so I love that. You can feel that around. That translates into a certain can-do mentality and a positivity.
It's 5-1. We're with Harold Hillman, life coach. We're looking at the differences in business practice in the workplace between the States, where Harold's from, and New Zealand, where he lives now. So you've noticed tall poppy syndrome. Career management is more subtle. Performance management, well, that's connected to tall poppy. Teams are stronger in New Zealand. Work-life balance is better and healthier in New Zealand. Yeah. There's definitely an entrepreneurial spirit. It's stronger. And what's your final distinction?
Well, it's the whole governance, the relationship between boards and executive teams, the rest of the organization. In the States, we have that interesting phenomenon where the chairperson is also typically the CEO. Mm. And so, you can manage that relationship much more tangibly, and there tends to be less tension sometimes, or tighter communication, because you have that single conduit between sort of the executive and the board, whereas in New Zealand, those are two different entities, and sometimes it creates a bit of strain where boards and execs have to work a bit harder to keep themselves connected, and sometimes to remind themselves that they're on the same team.
Let's go back to entrepreneurs, because the world needs more of them. Is the spirit higher in New Zealand or America in your mind, Harold?
I think it's high. My sense is it's higher in New Zealand. I think that's one of the reasons I stayed in New Zealand, Trudi. My plan was to go back to New York and launch my own business. But there was just something about the mentality of people really pushing into something that they believe in. Simon Sinek talks about the golden circle, and the fact that what you do is going to be greatly enhanced if it's connected to a central core, like a why, like a deeper purpose. And that's that sense that I really do feel when people are opening up whether it be a hair salon, or whether it be a bakery, or whether it be a dairy, or a small IT company, just friends and associates of mine all around New Zealand. There is just this wonderful spirit of wanting to do something that's meaningful in life, other than just a job, just a paycheck.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's look at my brother left radio to go and marry a lovely Georgian girl and live in the Bible Belt of the States. It was a bit of a shock for him. Have you got any advice for a Kiwi going to work in America? What advice would you give them to help acclimatise?
Well, I would say certainly in the States, turn up the volume on your voice, on your persona. Don't get lost in the pack. Individualism does, it's more prevalent in the U.S. People are more inclined to talk about achievements, and you just don't want to get lost in the pack. I'd also say just back yourself, assert your non-U.S. perspective, which may be helpful to the learning, but particularly, when coming from a different part of the world. And then finally, be assertive about what you need to grow and to stretch yourself. And so just let go of the tall poppy syndrome if you're going to the U.S. for an internship or a short secondment, and push into it. Have some fun.
Lovely to chat as always. He joins us every Sunday afternoon before 1. Harold Hillman, our life coach, keeping us on the right track.